Hey everybody, it's tafony here once again. Hope you're doing well. Today we're rambling about the Moog Mother-32. It is a desktop semi-modular synthesizer today. It is a full Eurorack voice module and it sounds like this. Okay, Mother-32, let's bring it in here a little bit. I want to try and cover a bunch of different things today. I want to talk about it after watching the Sound and Voltage video talking about how Mother-32 is a great starter synthesizer. I want to try and talk about it in that context maybe. Given that it's been out for quite a while now, I feel like people looking at this video will probably be considering getting into the modular game. If I can say anything on it, don't. Save your sanity, save your money, save your financial future. But if you are considering it, Mother-32 is a great way to get started with a bunch of the key components, and it sounds great. I'm going to try and talk about things in that context, and then go over all the individual pieces that make up the Mother-32, see how this goes. It's called Rambling About for a reason. If I'm going too fast or too slow, use the speed controls down below, because people complain about me doing both, and use it to suit your needs. Okay, Mother-32, let's bring it up here. Volume's all the way up. We are in auto mode just to start. I'm trying to do like as much of an init patch as possible to break down the different parts. A little bit of context with this one: I had the Mother-32 very early on in my, I don't know, modular journey, you could call it, like before I had anything else that was modular or semi-modular. Mother-32 was one of the very early ones, and I found some of the naming conventions really confusing to a beginner, like things that I think would be second nature to you later on down the line, like VCA mode, e.g. I understand. what an envelope is. I understand that EG stands for envelope generator, which wasn't clear to me in the beginning. But some of the semi-modularness of it too can be a little obtuse. Like this is the envelope to a beginner. The attack and decay with a sustain stage is what is referred to here on EG controlling the VCA. So you can bypass all of that by turning it on, which is also kind of backwards. But I just point that all out to say that yes, like the best way, I think, if you could choose anything, if you had unlimited resources, space, and time, money, all of those things to acquire all of the individual components, kind of like something you could do in VCV Rack, is like the most straightforward way in my mind to learn synthesis. It's easiest when all these things are separate. Nothing is implied to be normalized, like the envelope and the VCA and that switch here. That's like the best way to learn, I think. But if you want to do that in physical hardware, that's going to, you know, basically mean a mortgage, right? So if you want to get into something like a Mother-32, you have all of these separate components: envelope generator, VCA, VCO, modulation, and LFO, which is a second oscillator in a individual module context, a sequencer on board, like all of those pieces wrapped into one thing that can grow and be supplemental to your system later on. It's all very useful to a beginner, even if that was a little confusing to me in the beginning. Now, I understand full well that many of you probably won't struggle with those naming conventions like I did. You probably did your research and due diligence and actually went about it knowing with some intention or trying to learn. I just kind of winged it and thought, I don't know what this is, maybe I'll get a different module, which is not the way you should do it. But that is some important context to how I learned originally, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who went about it that way, hopefully. Anyway, I know I started with the VCA. I should talk about the VCO section to start it, but just to say for context, you can basically put it into like a drone mode by switching VCA mode on. It just won't do any envelope like you would here. Hold on, let's add some decay. That you would in envelope generator mode. We'll get to that at the end, but we'll start with the drone mode. So one thing that also confused me in the beginning, revisiting this later on here, you kind of so VCO, the oscillator, usually has a fine tune and a coarse tune. It kind of is only a fine tune here because you only have one knob, obviously, but you sort of set the range of your VCO by tapping it into this octave and location thing. So I can go up octaves too, right? For those big coarse controls of tuning that you wouldn't necessarily, you know, get over here. So when I first got it, I was like, wow, I am out of audio rate territory and having a hard time moving too far out of it. Well, you need to kind of do a macro tune using the sequencer to put yourself into a range you want to be in. So that being said, you get two waves. It's only one VCO, which when revisiting this or not revisiting it, thinking about the Mother-32 in the context of having a whole system and everything, one oscillator seems like very minimal for a full synthesizer voice, but when you hear it, like, you know, using all of the different modulations and stuff, I know that's kind of cheesy. It's a lot easier to just stack a crap ton of analog VCOs on top of each other to get some width, but like, it doesn't ever sound like really lacking, you know what I mean? That goes for many other single VCO voices that definitely aren't lacking anything. So two VCO shapes, you have the square wave with pulse width. Let's pitch this down a little bit here. I'll adjust my scope so you can see it a little clearer. Thankfully, on this front, the pulse width never gets to 100%. The manual said 2%, which is all the way to the left, or 98%, which is all the way to the right. Thank you. Because lots of pulse width modulation on VCOs that I've tried lately, they'll just let you crap it out completely and go basically cut your volume out completely, acting as a VCA, which you may want to do sometimes, but I don't necessarily want to do it. There is this VCO mod amount, so you can either have the LFO control that. And let's talk about the LFO. So LFO, if you are coming out of this as a beginner, low frequency oscillator, it is essentially the exact same as this audio rate oscillator, but at a way slower speed. We can scope that just to see. You probably won't hear that. There's two different ways, just like the other oscillator on board, but if we have the triangle wave, you'll see it's basically the same as the other one. It's just way slower, and when you listen to that, you can't hear anything because it's so deep down. It's out of sonic territory, which people refer to as audio rate VCA and you can use that LFO for internal modulations. There's the patch bay at the end. We'll get into that as well, but the semi-modular aspect of it, you have LFO rate and you have LFO destination, so pulse width while we're in square mode. We can have it do the twisting of this knob basically for us. I'll put that to noon, and our LFO rate. See how fast that's going with the red LED. We'll bring in the VCO mod amount, which is basically a VCA, which sets how much of this LFO is going to affect the pulse width. Now, I want to point out that when you get into really crazy territory, it does do what I was talking before about acting like a VCA, where it will actually just put the pulse width down to 0% or 100% and make silence. So be careful about that. If you start hearing that, and this is another thing that I'm thinking back to my original days with Mother-32, I'm like, why is the VCO mod amount broken? Well, no, I'm just pulsing it out of audio territory like you see there. Things that are fun to learn on the way. And then what I said before about how LFO is just the same as a regular oscillator, just at a slow rate, you can actually pulse this up into a super fast rate that would basically be audio territory. And then instead of like this slow moving modulation, you kind of get a new timbre out of the other things. So basically, if I switch back over to my LFO on the scope here, we have our triangle output. It's starting to look kind of like, and you can actually hear it a little bit, or a little bit more. It becomes its own. This is what we call audio rate, where you can hear it. It's basically going so fast that it can affect other things in a way that creates like a new timbre. By that I mean, instead of this slowly moving, evolving shape thing, when you start moving it so fast, it sort of turns into a new, static, unique thing, I guess. I hope that explained it in some way that is at all interesting. And in the context of PWM, we've got a little bit of amplitude modulation because it's cutting out all the way, right? Like, we're modulating it in and out of even being on, right? So yes, there's one VCO, but you can make some crazy timbres out of doing this, and that's even before we get into the filter. So yeah, and in the context of the Mother-32, I don't find I actually even use the sawtooth too much. It just sounds a little thinner. The square wave, and this was the same for the DFAM, just sounds like so fat. And like, to not use the PWM for that, I feel like is a missed opportunity, so I won't miss it. I will say I don't use this, much as it's crazy. I don't use that as much. It does sound good. If you start at different places with the pulse width too, like, you hear single VCO, two wave shapes, you think it's kind of limited, but when you get into the semi-modular aspects of doing crazy modulation to it at audio rate and stuff, like, there's a lot to chew on here. You can get into some nasty craziness. There's also FM, so if instead of our pulse width modulation, we were instead modulating the frequency, if we go over to the saw wave, pulse width won't do anything now, but we can instead do frequency. So this will track weird, or won't track, but can do crazy bleeps and bloops of this, like, I don't know, portamental vibrato sort of thing. But when you get up into audio rate, exponential, this won't track as you send it a sequence, but you can get some really cool timbres out of it like this, right? So suddenly our single VCO has a whole bunch of tricks up its sleeve. Put that down in VCO. Now, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead and jumping around and doing all these concepts that are way too deep for the intro for it, but rambling about it is what it is. What I wanted to point out here too, so those are the VCOs. So that is the VCO. We'll take off our FM and get back to the square. So we'll do a little bit of pulse width modulation. But what you can do, there's a internal analog noise source. So let's bring that in here. It's internally normalized. So let's just get a square wave going. Sorry, pulse width that. So we just get this like slowly beating chorusy effect. And then you have a mix here, so we can bring in analog noise. So the analog noise sounds like this. I know, in drone mode it just sounds like a TV static, perhaps tuned to a dead channel, but if we bring in the VCO on top of it, and we just use a hair of it, it can actually give us a little bit even more depth, right? So we get lots of PWM. Suddenly our one VCO has turned into something a little crazy. Right? And I'm not sending a sequence. I'm not doing anything with the filter yet, but if we skip ahead a little bit, you can make some really unique timbres out of all of this, right? It's not like I'm just listening to a plain square wave, right? Things that I expect it to. When we do, my sustain stage on, hold that open. Like, the timbres aren't super basic. It can get it can get up there. All right, VCO back on. We'll listen to that going. This is a nice chorus effect that I really like. Mix in some more noise. Gets crazy. I know that's like people always in full synthesizer demos say like, oh, you could make hats out of it. I don't think I'd ever go to my Mother-32 and try and make a hi-hat out of it, but you very much could. So now let's jump ahead to talking about the patch bay. We have in and out here. The outputs, like the VCA that you're listening to right now, are labeled with the white blocks behind them. The inputs are just white text on the screen. So you have an external audio input here. Now we can, instead of noise, mix in another wave, and that could be anything in my modular system. I don't know, I'll just patch in something like the Piston Honda because it is a very not analog source. Right? And then we can use all of our other components. And this is just kind of getting ahead of myself here. Just like that's a nice part about a semi-modular thing like this is you can just expand piece by piece. You have all the components you need to make a full synthesizer voice, but you might think, oh, I really am interested in wavetables. Well, I can get a wavetable oscillator and feed it through the rest of my synthesizer voice and not need anything else other than said wavetable voice to make that happen. The other thing I want to show you though, if you are using this maybe in the desktop context or I don't know, just looking for a different timbre, you can do some very shaped stuff by internally patching what you're not using. So right now I am in the square wave VCO, but we get individual outputs for the saw. Oh, it is a pulse VCO, not a square. Well, we're going to patch in the saw. So we're listening to the pulse, not the saw, but if we patch that saw into the external in, I'll turn down my pulse width mod just a bit, and then we can morph over to that saw or land somewhere in between where I'm blending the two wave shapes, right? And you don't lose your pulse width mod while you're at that either. We can crank that up and get this interesting new timbre in between, which is really cool. One of the first things I would want to do, though, if I was evolving my Mother-32 into a bigger setup is add some LFOs, basically, because as much as I like the one that's on here, I would want more. You can have one like running at audio right here, and then have one running slowly, which I'm going to grab from the multi-mod just out of screen here. We'll do something, I don't know, let's find a mix CV. So now I can morph between that pulse and that saw slowly, right? So here it's right? Very cool. Let's do a faster one just to make it more apparent. And yeah, in a drone context where I'm not using any envelope, it's not the super, it's not the most interesting, but and we'll do a slower one. You also want to attenuate this, I would say, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Take that mix CV out. So Moog and the synth community at large have talked to death about the Moog ladder filter. It is very famous. It is also very famous for sucking the low end out of things as you turn up the resonance, which is apparent here. Let's just keep our low pass mode on and all the way open. You'll hear, or you'll see as well, the overall amplitude comes down because basically taking the low end out of it, and it will self-oscillate like crap as well, which is very handy in other modes, but those are the things that the Moog is famous for. But what it is also famous for is sounding really, really freaking good, and really allows you to make some super unique timbres, which when you think subtractive synthesis, if you're comparing it to other like wavetable or whatever, you might think it sounds a little limiting on the surface, but when you get into doing modulations of these things, it can get really deep. Look at how different those timbres look on the scope side now that we've done that. And if we combine that with some VCF modulation, I'm in drone mode, so maybe we want to use the LFO, not the envelope generator. can see LFO is a little fast, but let's just make it slowly and evolving. Then we'll bring in more of the mod amount. And it can be positive or negative, so what if we close this all the way and then have it basically acting sort of like a low-pass gate, although the VCA isn't changing, but opening that filter in a positive way. So basically, for us, it's doing right. So put it up to noon, crank that mod amount all the way. I can also change the shape of my alpha wave, right? So right now you have the triangle wave, so the modulation, hey, let's just scope it. We can scope that. So you have triangle mode, it looks like this. If we went into square mode, it looks like that, so it kind of pop, right? If we do some popping by switching the alpha wave over to square, you get like really snappy envelopes, right? Filters up. And you can kind of make a generative VCA, like I'm not making a sequence here. I am just using the internal modulations to stop and start our filters, but this thing can sound very good. Can self-oscillate in some context too, like subtractive synthesis, there is so much depth to the filters that can be found. If you make them self-oscillate too. See how there is a sine wave buried beneath all of that opening of the VCA. If we do a little bit less of it, and the resonance down, bring the volume of this up, because again we're losing some low-end amplitude by using so much resonance. And that liquidiness, for me, is kind of the killer feature of this synthesizer, because the other components can be found elsewhere. You can get crazier timbres out of digital oscillators, but the liquidy analog goodness of that filter is as special as people say, in my opinion. Especially if you turn the resonance about here and go do it into the VCO, taking the VCO over to the square wave now. I just find that filter is special. It has that reputation deservedly. Yes. All right, resonance down, and there's also high pass mode. So if you want to cut out the low end instead of the high end, or boost it, because you can, here, let's make this patch a little less crazy, a little more bassy. You can boost the low end by, instead of, if you filter it out with no resonance, it'll basically just turn it down and it kind of sounds like, you know, that DJ effect. But if you crank up the resonance, you can actually, you're applying amplitude to the peak where of the cutoff, basically, right? So you can actually boost low end by, you hear some harmonics coming out of there, right? Which is kind of an interesting thing that, like, you hear high pass, like, you know, new timbres coming out of it too when I'm applying the LFO to that. Yeah. If I do negative polarity, go my LFO wave over to triangle so we can do a little bit of that. Again, audio rate, just yes. When you do like audio rate over filter mods, that's just like another wave shaping sort of tool in my mind, right? And it sounds so good. So that's the decay. Just pitch it down a hair. Listen to that. When you hear Moog mono synth, you don't think about these sort of timbres, but like that is sort of when they sell you know, semi-modular explorations and stuff. I think if you make it more tangible, you can think about like giving you the control to modulate all of these crazy different components at whatever rate, audio rate or otherwise. You can create new crazy creations that maybe you wouldn't associate with, again, a Moog mono synth. But maybe you should. At this point, Mother-32 is not new, and any analog synthesizer with these patch points can do these sort of things, but hey, listen to that. Yeah. It's go back to low pass mode. Where's my low pass mode? There's low pass mode. Yes. Okay, so we talked a lot about basically the components that make up the voice. There's a lot of utilities too as well, like VC mix. So you can do basically make a VCA where it mixes between one input and the second on the patch bay. This is mix 1, mix 2, and the VC mix out here. You can use that for a number of different things, like there's no attenuator on the LFO control for anything, but if we wanted to have an audio rate LFO with less amplitude, I'll use this cable that's already here already. We'll take the LFO triangle output here, LFO triangle here, and put it into mix 1 and leave mix 2 empty. There's just a random patch idea. I guess we can take that output here, VC mix out, and then we'll patch that into the cutoff. So if I want to do a little bit of modulation of my cutoff, I can attenuate by mixing from mix 1 into the empty mix 2, and it'll just be a little bit less modulation. What if we change destinations though? If we, I don't know, mix CV will bring in some noise, so it's modulating. Yeah, here, bringing in some attenuated LFO, that is bringing in some noise on this mix knob, right? Because we're using mix in 1 and nothing in 2, so attenuating it by mixing it to nothing, and then mix out into mix CV, which is this mix knob, and then my LFO is affecting that, which is not an internally patched thing, a semi-modular thing. We are fully using modular patch bay to make that happen. Okay, sorry, rambling about is what it says on the tin. The whole idea is I want to be like a modular podcast, basically, and the modules are simply an excuse to put me in front of you. So, okay, let's talk about the envelope generator stage. So whether you're sending it a MIDI sequence, you're playing the keyboard manually, you're sending it a CV gate pair, or using the onboard sequencer, every time you basically have a step, a gate, or a trigger, you are generating an envelope, which is what EG is on here in a bunch of different places. It's envelope generator, and because the first thing I've switched over the VCA mode to the envelope generator, these envelope controls will define how open our VCA, being the volume, is. When I'm not sending it any envelope, there's nothing. When I'm holding it down, the volume is open, the VCA. So, attack control, if you are brand new, attack will control how long it takes for our envelope to fade in, basically. There's a lot of nuance to the curve, the overall timing, and stuff like that, and how it behaves when it's re-triggered. But the quickest possible way, how long does it take for the gate to reach its full amplitude? So if I make it really long, it swells in really slow. If I make it really short, we're all the way to the top right away. So somewhere in between. When there's lots of nuance to all of these things, and when you're using it for envelope, it's kind of a different context too, but you think like cinematic, right? Like something swells in, right? That's attack. Make it really short. Generally, when I'm using bass lines, I want my envelopes to be what people call snappy, so really short. So I can send it lots of notes without any lag at the start, right? Because if I do a really fast sequence, like, right, you don't hear anything because my envelope didn't have a chance to even reach the peak. If I have a really snappy envelope, I got there right away. Now on the opposite side, there is decay. So how long does it take to reach back to 0? Do you want it to trail off really slowly? In my early days of playing bass guitar and bringing a synthesizer on stage, I would just basically use insanely long decays to kind of do what this VCA mode is, but not exactly. It, like, at some point it will fall off, but you could hit something and let it ring out for a very long time. Now, this decay is actually pretty short relative. If you have a sustain stage on or off as well, it gives us that option to hold it open. There aren't any settings to the sustain amount, but if I have sustain off, the whole envelope will cycle no matter how long I hold it, right? So I'm holding this key down, sustain is off, it just does the entire attack cycle, decay cycle. But if I have sustain on, the attack cycle comes in, and then it stays at fully open until I let go. Now the decay stage can go. I'm trying to explain this in a way that I would have liked to hear it explained early on, but hopefully that has some value now. Now, because I only have two hands, let's do some sequencing of it. I'm going to send VCO volt per octave from an analog sequencer, but this could be MIDI. This could be the onboard sequencer, which we're probably not going to get to today, but I'm going to send it into VCO volt per octave. Again, could be MIDI, probably will be MIDI if you're new. So we have our pitch coming in. If I manually trigger it, you should hear my sequence going. I'll send my gate into the gate input. How you're sequencing it isn't super important right now. This is the simplest sequence. Let's do a new one. Let's send it something a little more drastic, so I'll make my decays a little shorter. So we have a sequence coming in using that same envelope generator that's opening and closing the volume. So decay up. I'm leaving my sustain off for right now just because I'm not sure what's going on the sequencer side. But if I want the same modulation, the same shape basically of my sound, if you're looking at it as a note, right? Each blip is a monophonic sound. If I want that same sort of evolution within the same beat to affect, let's say, the VCO pulse width mod. So instead of my LFO, I'm going to switch over to EG, and now during each note, it's going to cycle the pulse width all the way up and down. I'll offset my pulse width using the knob so it can travel a little wider and then back to a thin one again. And then we can do the same for the VCF, and this is classic filter modulation for me. Set it so that the polarity is up, the filter is opening. Now we're doing sort of low pass gate stuff. It doesn't sound anything similar, but the idea is the same. My amplitude and my filter are both opening with the same shape, right? Another thing that I really wish somebody had said to me in my early days with synthesis is that filters without motion sound really like weird EQs. What you really want to do to get some interesting timbres out of them is make them move. So make sure you're using either the envelope generator, the LFO, or both. So how can we do both? Well, let's do, I don't know, let's take the VC mix. I don't know if these things will stack without having to use an external mixer, but let's try it. So let's take our triangle and patch that into the VCF cutoff. Yeah, so now both are going, I believe. Unless I need to mix it, which we can do just fine. Let's go into mix 2 with that one, grab another patch cable, and mix in our envelope generator into mix 1. So then our VC mix here, we'll just put it up at noon, and we have both. I will take the VC mix and patch that into the cutoff. So now, yep, envelope generator and the LFO are both modulating it. I do a little bit less resonance. Bring my LFO up to audio rate. Bring that cutoff all the way down so there's room for it to travel basically when I apply amplitude to it. It's a very, I don't know, West Coast-ish sounding sound. Mix in some noise. Yeah. I guess I'm a little surprised at how many sonic options there are. When I hear one VCO full synthesizer voice, I'm kind of like, I don't know, is it going to be super basic and super limited and a one-trick pony? But then, I don't know, I feel like this really is great for beginners as well, because there's some deep timbres to get out of it, right? You can pull some, things that aren't just a square wave into a filter. But it will happily do the former when you're new too, which is perfect for a beginner. So, all right, I'm Tafony. This is indeed a great option for beginners, but I'm really impressed with how it sounds as well. It's all the pieces you need to expand, grow into the next bigger system. So I'll link to the sound and voltage videos as well. Jeff does some amazing stuff that make the learning of it very easy and has some great guides. So I'll link to those. And until next time, thanks so much for watching. Take care, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.